Greetings, Hotep, and welcome yet again to another broadcast of AST Speaks, Building a New Legacy. This is your host for this evening, Queen Mother Dr. ChenziRa, and being with our kings and queens of the airwaves on these first and third Thursday at 8 p.m. gives us an opportunity to speak of truth is power and to highlight I have a friend here that really loves me, small Chihuahua-like puppy, and he really wants me to know that he's present. And so I'm sharing that with everyone. And I'm really grateful, really, really grateful. But I wanted to just highlight a couple of things that, as we speak of National Poetry Month and look at all of the different observances of poetic verse and persons speaking of what are some of the vibes that really make us poets? What does a poet recite when they are feeling joyous? What does a poet recite when they are feeling a little dismay? What does a poet recite when they feel inspired? And what does a poet bring to the table that restores truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness, and harmony? All of that. The one term, four letters for all of those seven principles is ma'at, and means that we can speak of all of the things that allow us to flow. For example, in my mother's house, there are many mansions. She has prepared them for me. In my father's house, there are many mansions, and he too has prepared a place for me. Thin wisp of a moon, let me catch my eyes on you. Though you're hiding yourself, you are casting a spell on me. I'm going to take my freedom. Woo! I'm going to take my freedom because I've gotten my wings. I am going to just take my freedom. Yes, take my freedom because I have gotten my wings. I keep waiting for a sign, a zephyr, a whirlwind, anything to take me skyways. I am the heiress of the air. Did you get that? I am the heiress of the air. A wisp of a dream, earthquaking dream. I can feel the spirit, the presence, the love, the joy, the engagement, the ooh, all of that energy of air, fire, earth, water, and spirit. To be continued. So that just gives you an idea, and that's a combination of spoken word, poetic verse that was really penned through a number of sisters in a collective back in the 70s. Yes, we're dating ourselves. While we were doing certain work around Crossroads Black Theater House within Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers University back in the day. So, just to give an idea, and again, these are the types of things that we remember in terms of rhythm, purpose, energy, integrity, and much, much more. So, just to give a vision of some of the things, some of the places, some of the energetics that we bring to the table around National Poetry Month and all that comes with that. At the same time, I would be remiss if I did not highlight that as we are speaking there in the United Nations headquarters in Geneva, this week has been a time of the fifth session of the UN's Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. Let that settle. Take a deep breath. Again, this is a time, this period in April, while on this side of the hemisphere in the 48 contiguous US and all of its territories, colonies, and spaces, we were worried about tax day, and prayerfully everyone has gotten over that hurdle. In the other part of the world, impacting people of African ancestry, African ascent, there are more than 1,500 delegates from around the world that are engaged in listening to, having conversations about the fifth session of the United Nations Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. And what I desire to share is something that I shared during a conversation with delegates from and representatives, specifically from the president, along with membership of the National Medical Association yesterday, where there was an entire discussion and a very concise presentation. They said it was going to be 60 minutes, and it was exactly 60 minutes to explore just sounding the alarm in regards to what this Cuban oil embargo has done to the country of Cuba. So, for those that recognize human rights and justice and freedom and independence and decolonization and respect for sovereignty and who, maybe even the Declaration of Human Rights, they would be able to speak truth as power, not just truth to power, as Dr. Alethea Rayner has so kindly shared with us, right? So that we can speak about these things in a very positive context, in a very engaging space. I also encourage persons, if you would like to see or read any of the articles, papers that are linked to this, please email AST Speaks, that's ASTSPEAKS at gmail.com. And once you specify that you would like either We Owe a Duty to Cuba by the Honorable Ambassador David Comisiong of Barbados to CARICOM, along with other papers and research and documents and statements and resolutions related to that particular theme or anything else linked to the elevation, the upliftment, the protection of all people. Yet at this particular time, the UN's Permanent Forum for People of African Descent are authentically sharing presentations, resolutions. Some people use the term declarations. I like to use the flow of the Vatican. Let's just have decrees, because when you do and state a decree, it's like that for like millennia, something with permanence, not just a declaration that you have to keep amending and amending that doesn't help humanity, just on a joyous note. So I just want to highlight some of the things that His Excellency Ambassador David Comisiong shared as part of his statement to the United Nations Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. And I pause when I say some of this because I like when I'm able to quote what other people say, because sometimes when I say it, it comes across kind of scathing, kind of rough, a little bit sharp, like sword-like. And that's not my intention. Just keep me laughing. It's not my intention. It's just that the craziness that's happening in the Earth community right now is almost unimaginable, even though we're imagining it in real time. But it just seems like sometimes you're like, is this really happening? It's almost like a ferret. Huh? Right. You're just not sure what it's surreal. That's the part. And so you will hear that as I'm sharing some of this, and at some point, I think it's really important for our sisters and brothers to really feel the presence and really understand the honor that is linked to how we begin to use our poetic voice, our creative and innovative voice, our performative voice, even to speak about the things that are happening in a manner that allows us to heal beyond the Espetian chaotic, out of Ma'at, opposite of anything with order, truth, or justice, lies, injustice, disorder, and anarchy that is happening around us. So, as I said, for those persons that would like more information about what's happening around lifting this oil blockade against Cuba, that is only strengthening the human rights violations that the US and its allies are imposing on the people of Cuba, because this is parallel to what's happening in Lebanon, what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Sudan. And we can go through the earth plane. what happened in Venezuela, what they're threatening to do in Cuba, and what they have threatened to do to any nation that supports reparations for the human injustices imposed on people of African and indigenous ancestry. I want people to just recognize when you see these various soon to be released, updated plans from the CARICOM Reparations Commission, which I have the honor and privilege of serving on in a capacity through the Caribbean Pan African Network Executive Council representation. There's a number of things that are being reorganized, re strategized in a form. Most persons like to do diplomacy and peace and tranquility and all of that shared humanity language and action. But it would be really nice if that was also met equitably by the forces that are creating all of this chaos, all of this anarchy, all of this warfare, all of the rape, lynching of a different form, medical terrorism on the highest level, amongst other things, climate terrorism, water terrorism, agricultural terrorism. I just need people, when they're interfering with your clean water source, when they're interfering with you having proper medical resources to just stay healthy and alive, when they're interfering with your food security and you're a sovereign nation, much less being a colony, because then it becomes we're going to let you be a belonger when we say so. You can carry the passport, but citizenship, okay, so we're not going to go there, or we might a little later, because there's several other points I'd like to highlight. So I'd like to just share a segment of what was offered at the UN Permanent Forum on People of African Descent by His Excellency Ambassador David Commercion. And this is actually coming from his full statement to the fifth session happening in Geneva this week, April 14th to 17th. And I just wanted to highlight, and I quote, so for those that are listening, remember, these are the words being read from the statement of His Excellency David Commercion, Ambassador of Barbados to CARICOM, and a number of other pieces in his portfolio. And I don't remember the whole list, I believe Grenada, St. Vincent Grenadines, among other areas and regions. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, Barbados entirely approves of the central theme of this session of the Permanent Forum, namely, expanding the human rights of people of African descent under the second International Decade for People of African Descent. And we can't help but note that this theme is being addressed against the backdrop of such developments as the emergence of a determined effort to disregard, undermine, and destroy the intertwined systems of multilateralism and international law, and to take the world back to an ethos of might makes right. The continuing existence of tragic major Black on Black military conflicts on the African continent and an explosion in gun related Black on Black youth violence in several regions of the African diaspora, and the recent startling experience of witnessing virtually the entire white world, with one or two notable exceptions, either voting against or abstaining from a United Nations General Assembly resolution that declared the trafficking of enslaved Africans and the racialized chattel enslavement of Africans as the world's gravest crime against humanity. In light of the foregoing, Barbados would like to urge the Permanent Forum to use this fifth session to brainstorm and develop strategies and recommendations directed to the following. One, a defense of the system of multilateralism and international law. We, the African and African descended nations and peoples, are conscious that our modern history has consisted of a struggle to free ourselves from enslavement and colonialism and to establish nation states that would take their rightful place as independent, self determining sovereign entities, and an international order of law and multilateralism. That international order was never perfect, indeed. It contains many structural inequalities, but it did still provide us with a framework for development and advancement. We must therefore resolve that the world will not revert to the pre 1945, pre United Nations era of unbridled imperialism and lawlessness. Let us therefore mount a defense of international law and multilateralism and embed within that defense a resolve to correct the deficiencies and inequalities within the system. And it should be noted that a number of relevant corrective proposals are to be found in CARICOM's Bridgetown initiative. Number two, the establishment of fundamental principles and best practices for peacemaking and for the construction of nurturing, conscious, humane, African centered nations and societies. In the Caribbean, we have designated our region as a zone of peace and have established for ourselves such principles as an insistence on the peaceful settlement of disputes and avoidance of the establishment of foreign military bases on our national territory, and commitment to a non aligned foreign policy based on the doctrine of friends of all, satellites of none. And in the Republic of Barbados, we have committed ourselves to a social democratic construct for our society, a construct that is characterized by free education and substantially free public health care, consultative and people participatory forms of governance, trade union organizations in virtually every sector of the society, an unshakable commitment to electoral democracy, an ethic of gender equality, and the list goes on. Let us therefore follow these and other relevant examples and craft our own code of national and people development principles for the nations of global Africa. Three, a campaign to tell our story and deconstruct the myth of white or Western superiority. The fact that 55 predominantly white nations either voted against or abstained from the UN General Assembly resolution to declare the trafficking in enslaved Africans and the associated system of racialized chattel slavery, the gravest crime against humanity, tells us that a large segment of the international community has not yet developed a proper understanding of the tragic awesomeness of that history, or worse still, are still wedded to the myth of white or Western moral and civilization superiority. Either way, the Permanent Forum and the wider United Nations system must now significantly intensify efforts to tell our story and to forcibly bring to the consciousness of the world the enormity of the crime that was committed and the enormity of the debt that is owed. And let us make a very special effort to place these truths before the gaze and consciousness of the people and governments of Europe and North America. There is much educating and consciousness raising work to be done if we are to achieve the delivery of reparatory justice before the end of this second international decade for people of African descent. And of course, he's addressing Madam Chair, Professor Gaynell Curry of the Caribbean nation of the Bahamas. And he continues, I hope and trust that you will be in attendance at our annual Caribbean Community CARICOM meeting in St. Lucia in July of this year, engaging with our heads of governments. Indeed, I look forward to the establishment of a practice whereby the chair of the Permanent Forum is invited to attend the annual conferences of all of our African or substantially African regional organizations, the African Union, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, the Commonwealth Heads of Government Conference, CARICOM, and the list goes on. Let the United Nations Permanent Forum link us all together and help us to develop and express a common program for the advancement of people of African descent. Again, he addresses the Madam Chair, Gaynell Curry, who's currently the chair of the Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. And he closes with, please rest assured that the forum that you lead will continue to have the full support of the Republic of Barbados, unquote. And I'm sharing that statement, and I didn't think it was that concise, but again, what they provide for you to be able to share commentary a statement that is concise, clear. You have your workable, actionable, deliverable points, and you move that forward. And that is from His Excellency Ambassador David Commercial. And again, I've been really granted a significant amount of permission to just share some of his commentary on his behalf, primarily because at this particular time, he is literally presenting and sharing and very engaging conversation, dialogue, and organizing to really elevate what is coming out of this second International Decade for People of African Descent through the UN's Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. And again, there are other structures, there are other organizational entities that exist within the Caribbean space, within the entire African diaspora, around the globe. Let me be specific. And I think it's very important for those that are willing to utilize the United Nations and the respective agencies or organizations to engage, do so. Those that prefer to engage in another layer of organizing for the upliftment of our people through, for example, African fundamentalist initiatives, Black nationalist initiatives, Pan African initiatives, do so. The whole idea is to keep the fire burning. I know that sounds like an old adage, but we need to keep the fire burning. We need to organize. We need to gather. Some people want to do it till peace is still. Some people want to do it till there's a fire burn. But whatever is the core of how you're getting it done, the intention is so that we can restore. I'm going to say that one more time. The intention is for us to restore and heal our shared humanity. And that's very challenging to do with energy that appear human, that are not interested in doing a level of work that is grounded in truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness, and harmony. And so we're going to take a shift from that particular conversation. And because I think it's important, persons that want to, I've covered a couple of things thus far. So there's people that may want to look at they may desire to look at the "We Owe a Duty to Cuba" articles. If you just put in "We Owe a Duty to Cuba," Ambassador Commerstown, you're going to see copies of that particular article that has been shared around the globe over the last month or so. And then for the actual statements, and to not only hear his statement, but a host of other delegates that are at the UN in Geneva during the PFAD, Permanent Forum for People of African Descent, fifth session. There'll be other opportunities to just go to their website and see the live feed for those persons that are interested in knowing what is being said from brothers and sisters in Central and South America, what's being said by different Caribbean countries, those in CARICOM as well as those that are not, what is being said from our brothers and sisters in the 48 contiguous US, what is being said and shared with our brothers and sisters in Canada, Oceania, Polynesia, all those spaces that we tend to forget that there are people of African ancestry and descent, because at the end of the day, Dinkinesh, that they miscall Lucy, we'll have that mitochondrial DNA conversation at another broadcast. That would take a little bit longer than the 30 minutes that we have left. So I'll just kind of pause for that element. The other part that's really powerful is while this is also happening, the high executive council meetings of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, African Communities League, Rehabilitating Committee 2020, long, UNIA ACL RC 2020, is in effect for this week as well. And they will be having their closing convenings tomorrow. And with that, it's really important that brothers and sisters are just aware. If you're not in an organization, now you're going to know who is one of my teachers, a very powerful ancestor, none other than Comrade Baba Kwame Ture of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Organize, organize, organize. And in the 21st century, we might say it 6 times. Organize, 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 pause, organize, organize, organize. So if you're not in an organization or with a collective that facilitates what is your destiny, your engagement, your charge, whether it is through, because again, I remember the time where persons were like, well, I don't want to be in a sorority because that's Greek and such and such. However, I want to highlight, I have observed over the last several few decades, I'll put it in that context. When you have an organization of people of African ancestry that lasts more than a century, you got to show respect. You may not agree with the strategies and tactics on how they engage, but the fact that they've been able to work together, have some principal organizing efforts that support agriculture, architecture. And when I'm speaking of architecture, I'm not just talking about building the buildings, but the architecture of our family structure, the architecture of our societal structure, the architecture of how we engage with things linked to agriculture and our economy, as well as how we look at the arts that govern the universe and the sciences therein. How do we handle our relationship with, quote, astronomy? Not astrology, but that's a part too. But how do we handle engaging with our earth space and our universal space? And how do we show respect to one another as sisters, as brothers, as keepers of tradition? So I have observed, especially in the university circle, this is also a very powerful time following the spring equinox of March 22nd on or abouts, where brothers and sisters are in a form of have initiation, rites of passage to engage and support sisterhoods, brotherhoods, fraternal orders, sorority circles, women's groups, men's groups. Some people get a little bit over the top when we start talking about the Masons or lodge systems or the organization of Eastern systems, etc., or the Eastern stars. I want people to get past that, because what we're looking for, what is keeping us in harmony with the Creator? What is keeping us in harmony so that we can get through, elevate, ascend in a living space with one another to really address and not get twisted by the distractions that are being imposed on us every squinette, shorter than a second, every day, 24/7, 365, year after year? How do we move beyond that? And what type of mindset transformation is essential for that? How do we shift that ecosystem? What types of systemic change? Better than that, because persons like that term systems change. How do you shift the system so that it supports our elevation to the best of our ability and in a way that authentically helps us to bring some other aspects of truth as power in our day-to-day lives? So good evening, Trivita, Sister Queen Trivita. It's an honor to have you here as well. And I'm just saying that these are the kinds of things that if we were to, again, we're not going to always agree, because if everybody was the same, it would just look like, for those, and now I'm really dating myself, the Stepford Wives or some kind of Manchurian candidate type cyborg society. It would really look like AI ran everything, which it can't do if we don't let it, right? And when we're speaking of AI, we're speaking of the artificial piece. When we speak of AI cubed or AI 360, then we're talking about ancestral intelligence that goes beyond this current 21st century era and thought process that can be very anti human and exclusive instead of being inclusive and being treated. These technologies are to be treated the same way that we looked at, oh, wow, this is a very advanced pencil and eraser. Ooh, this is a really nice scientific calculator. Remember when they came out and everybody said you're going to forget how to do math? You're not going to be able to do calculus and trigonometric functions because you're going to be so dependent on the scientific calculator. And then what happened? They started to become less useful, almost obsolete. And our intelligences kept elevating and escalating to where we were using other forms, not even the old Fortran, PL1, COBOL, programming, the keyboarding. Those of us that remember that, we have shifted into another layer of engagement and programming that really supports another higher order thinking skill if we keep critical thinking, inferential, and critical levels of comprehension and engagement and interaction to support thought in action, not just repetition and vomiting knowledge that we're being exposed to, but authentically using the information. The balance, and I keep saying it, if we forget that our grounding to the earth through agricultural liberty principles, grow something. If you don't eat, this doesn't apply to you. But there are those that are viewing and listening that actually eat anything. And I'm not going to, this is not an exercise of being vegan. For those that choose to be, fantastic. Those that choose not to be, just be mindful. Because modesty, como? Moderation is the key of how you engage. How much water are you drinking? And what kind of water are you drinking? Are you only drinking water that comes out of plastic? Are you fortifying your water? Are you making sure that you stay hydrated? What type of exercise do you do? Are you doing, and if you have problems with yoga because it sounds too Hindi and it seems too spiritual, then at least just do the movements. Because you can call it calisthenics, acrobatics. The roots of yoga is dance, and not dance for lust driven, avarice, negativity, and whining. Whining, let me go back, twerking, the one that's out of order. But dance is supposed to be spiritually uplifting and connected to spiritual acuity and form. And it's also supposed to help keep the body fluid, let the heart stay focused and flowing so that there are minimal heart attacks, minimal cardiovascular imbalances, minimal arterial sclerosis issues, minimal circulation problems. So, some of what I'm sharing, and we're going to have a part two to this in our next podcast, and prayerfully, my colleague, comrade, and sister in this work of holistic wellness and naturopathic healing, none other than Dr. Tissa Muhammad, who has had the joy. We share some of the similar teaching practices. We were both exposed to the wonderful work, quite intensive work of the honorable ancestor, Dr. Leila Africa, pre his publications like Nutricide, going back to where he was really giving a series of courses around African holistic health and providing us with techniques and strategies, not just to deal with our own individual wellness, but to be able to master and continue in our study and our liberty that facilitated healing through a variety of modalities, whether it was iridology, whether it was, doing colon therapy, whether it was involved in water therapies outside of the body system, exercise, the importance of rest, the importance of growing your food. It's a relationship between you and the soil, not dirt, soil, the earth, when you're growing your food and then you're eating from what you grow versus going into a supermarket where you're not sure whose hands were where and whether or not they really want you to live long and strong. I'm just saying these things so that you can prepare because the next session will be one of those bring your notebooks out, your journals, have your iPad close at hand or your cell phone notes applications open so that you can take down a host of different notes and information just for your own edification and upliftment and much, much more. And for those that aren't familiar with the work of Dr. Tissa Muhammad of Phoenix Rise, I encourage you, just Google her name. And that way you will get an opportunity to see, and maybe I shouldn't just say Google, search in your search applications, because it's not just Google, to learn more about some of the persons that I'm mentioning as I highlight that. The other piece that I'd like to speak to tonight, because it's always a wonderful joy when we speak of what is truth is power, What are some of the pathways that persons engage in some of this work? Because again, we've talked about what's happening in the UN, and there's a number of things. It's not only PFAD, but there are a number of pieces that are being highlighted at this particular time. Some persons are relatively quiet when it comes to what's really going on in our world community and what exactly can we say and do when it comes to the form in which our brothers and sisters speak of different conversations around historiography. Last night, and I like to always show multiple sides of things, yeah, but so because we're not just diverse, we're just very eclectic. So we've got brothers and sisters that want to be in every organization, they're on every board to the best of their abilities. So when you look at their signatures, they got like a line of like 90 different organizational entities in one lifetime at the same time that they list underneath their names. And then you have others that are very stealth like and they don't really disclose some of the work that they're involved in. And they prefer to stay in the, I won't just say in the background, but they prefer to be armor bearers. They prefer to support, whether it's financially, in kind, spiritually, through prayer, or they're physically on the front line, boots on the ground, working with organizations. I think it's important to know everyone, if everyone contributed and did their part, the load would be lighter. I'm going to say that again. If everyone did their part in our elevation and our upliftment and our restoration of our shared humanity, the load, especially for those of us, or maybe I should just say for those, because sometimes I'm a part of the us and sometimes I do just, won't say go on retreat, but I just ease because we have to rejuvenate and we have to strengthen ourselves at all times. And it's not just being selfish or selfless, it is authentically restoring reciprocity. Many times when we speak of the principles of Ma'at, people remember the truth, justice, order part, they remember the balance part, they remember the divine righteousness part, and they remember harmony. But they seem to just skip over reciprocity. And that's the one that really can undo very good relations amongst our brothers and sisters that are close to us, within our families, those that we work with, those that we are involved in spiritual fellowship and engagement with, and beyond. So I just offer and ask, have a little more grace, be a tad more understanding of where the other person is that may be really establishing that imbalance. I tend to use the minimize conflict by minimizing contact that I learned from great ones like Neely Fuller. That may not work for you. And so, whatever is the system that allows you to trot on the earth in the highest form of balance, use that one. And for those in the back of the class that feel like they just got to cuss everybody out, find a stronger technique than just cussing everybody out because it takes a lot of energy. It messes up your liver if you do it with all that toxic flaring and right. Just on a serious note, I'd like to highlight as well that there is a broadcast in our Caribbean spaces. It emanates from our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Tobago, those that are linked to the Emancipation Support Committee of TNT of Trinidad and Tobago, and it's usually um, hosted by Dr. Claudius Fergus, as well as Dr. Shabaka Cambon and Sister Queen Renee Francois. It is called Indaba, and I'm going to keep encouraging brothers and sisters on Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Eastern. You can look for ES. I'm going to get that together. Sometimes it's ESCTT on YouTube. I know that they also are on the ESCTT on Facebook, and you can view it. And many times they have some very engaging, really powerful guests that are like, stalwarts in the various movements, very knowledgeable around what is happening with persons of African ancestry, how is this impacting our brothers and sisters in other parts of the world. And specifically last night, there was a very enlightening versation regarding, and I just want to highlight some of the topics that were covered uh, last night. Has the Caribbean abandoned Cuba? Also, they have the Africa report and the resource nationalism vis-a-vis the UN resolution on the transatlantic slave trade. Really looking at that resolution and seeing what are the action elements that are involved in that, and then what is the outcomes that are intended or projected, right? And then, of course, around this time of the year, there was a conversation in the community corner celebrating the 60th anniversary of the visit of His Imperial Majesty, Haile Selassie I, Emperor of Ethiopia, to Trinidad and Tobago. And I think it's important to know that these types of observances, celebrations, I'm saying celebrations because that's what we speak of in this Western space. But when persons speak in the Irie vibration amongst Rastafari, then you're going to say I. I liberations. You're gonna say I tal, not just vital, right? You're gonna kind of keep that iriness in what you're speaking to. So I think it's yes, I think it's important. You can tell we have audience today. We have audience today, right? And we're very, very grateful because that gives a tad more soulfulness to even having this type of a conversation, sharing this type of information, because there's a significant amount of activity, engagement happening. So last night's Indaba program really had several, as I mentioned, the hosts and their featured guests included our comrade brother Felipe Noguera of the Pan African Federalist Movement of the Caribbean. There were also representatives, Asim Pottinger of Zion, permiso, Priest Imesley of Zion and Asim Pottinger, so that they shared information on the different celebrations and observances, and obviously serious Bengi sessions that are taking place in recognition of this 60th anniversary of the visit of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia to Trinidad and Tobago. So you can do the math on the 60th when it happened to know more. I also encourage, as we move towards our last segment of tonight's broadcast, it's very important that if you're not familiar with any of these organizational entities that I'm mentioning, then please just send an email to astspeaks at gmail.com, or look on the various social media platforms and look up the Caribbean Pan African Network. Find out about the Pan African Federalist Movement that is global and has representation. I'm highlighting those of our comrades that's in the area where I reside here in the Caribbean, right? I think it's really important. Learn about what the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago are doing. And keep in mind, if you are into Pan Africanism and you're already in an organization and you would like to network in the Caribbean spaces around Pan African ideas, actions, programs, institutes, programs, etc., then link with the Caribbean Pan African Network, because that's why it was established as a network. It's not to it's not an insular network. It's designed so that there's representation throughout the Caribbean space, and from the Bahamas all the way into Suriname. We have brothers and sisters that support some of our work as well within spaces like Guyana, where people forget that, yes, it's physically, geographically in South America. However, because of the people that have shared in the history, the culture, the tradition, the legacy, and the work in Guyana, these are Caribbean. It's all part of that Caribbean Sea piece. And so we really have to work on those things and bringing them into a fullness in many, many respects. I think this is also a great time to look at some of the organizations, and I'm speaking of the organizations that either I work with or the ones that I'm familiar with what they're doing. So I will always highlight those organizations like Corredor Afro, the African corridor that exists in Luisa in Puerto Rico, our sister island. And I think it's important for persons, if you're not familiar with Corredor Afro, CORREDOR Afro.org. Find out what's happening in these organizations that really restore the African ancestral rootedness and the spiritual institutions, the traditional African institutions in these spaces, right? Because not everybody that speaks Spanish is a conquistadores. I think people need to know that, right? And not everybody that's speaking French in these spaces. Just remember the nature of colonization. That was the nature of colonization. We're going to strip you of your African ancestral traditions. We're going to take you from your land space. We're going to mix up your language, make you shun your own and speak something that's completely outside and foreign to your spirit. We're going to shift how you eat and how you grow food, how you drink water, how you stay hydrated. We're going to shift your wellness care and herbal and knowledge of herbal treatments to stay healed, right? And then we're going to change your religion to a point that you cuss your own ancestral deities and worship the deities that enslaved you. Just on a GP note, this does not apply to those brothers and sisters that understand the truth and essence of spirituality through the lens of the religions that they practice. So make sure that people understand what I just said. I'm going to say that again. Your spiritual relationship with the Creator, by all the names that we use that are elevated on high, whether you say Jehovah, Jah, Yahweh, whether you refer through the Elohim, you speak of Jesus, Yeshua, we can go through this one. Whether you speak of Heru, whether you speak of Astan Asar, whether you say Oludumare, when you start saying Alegba, when you start speaking of the energy of the Ordi, whatever names that you're using, we're speaking of the elevation. This has nothing to do with man made, organized, invasionary, colonial religiosity. Make sure that I cleared that up because I don't want anyone to feel that this is because it's definitely not a attack of any sort. It's just that that's one of the advantages that we have when we start to embrace our ancestral intelligence, because we start to recognize all of the different forms and structures and techniques and vibrations of how we engage with our relationship with the Almighty Creator by all the names that are venerated. Make sure I say that part. Because we know that there are that's why when we're saying we're pouring libations and we're sharing water to soil, water to a plant, when we're doing nobody says anything when they're doing frankincense and myrrh in the Catholic Church. But let me start burning frankincense and myrrh. And it's like, oh my God, what is she doing? And we have to like shift beyond that because it's one learned from the other. One is millennia upon millennia upon millennia upon millennia upon millennia upon millennia in its ancestral groundings. And when we learn together, we heal together, we strengthen one another together, and just possibly we can survive. Change that. We can thrive and really move into another layer of engagement. So I share these things, and that hour just goes when we're starting to have fun and engage with information. I know I've covered quite a bit, and I'm going to keep doing that because the intention is share with us on Oz Speaks, Building a New Legacy. What are some themes and ideas that you would like to discuss and hear talked about? Who are some of the persons that you sense can provide some powerful, actionable deliverables to these conversations that we have on elevating ourselves and being able to exist with prosperity? That's the other word that I like. Prosperity exponentially. Yes, that one. To the 1000th power. Can you imagine? That $1 with a million of us extended to the 1,000th power. Oh, we would just be, it would be mellow. And it would be so serene that even with the most chaotic examples of the lack of humanity that many of us are experiencing in different spaces, across languages, across geographic locations, across class, across ethnic groups, race, gender, and much more, we would actually thrive. You know my usual saying, I'm always referencing culture heals humanity, land is our foundation, and spiritual harmony unifies. You are a house of life. We are houses of life. And the more that we remember that, and the more that we stay in that space of not blending to the point that you soften your grounding of strength in your relationship with the infinite source, but strengthen it to a point that you can authentically heal, you can authentically be edified, you can authentically shift this narrative, and the distractions will just dissipate. All of them, even the two-legged walking ones, before your very eyes. That's the power when we speak of the illuminated one, plural. That's the power when we speak of identifying how we heal together, how we strengthen ourselves together. And again, together is not always being in the same physical geographic space, but that we have our satellites around the globe giving us strength, supporting one another, and power. So, with that, I encourage brothers and sisters, take a deep breath and hold that breath for 4, 3, 2, 1. Rub those hands together, let it out. Put those fingertips on the back of your neck and just let go of all that tension, all that stress, all that news that you kept looking at for every second that your phone blinked. I listen to the news on Mondays and Thursdays. I don't know about you. I minimize looking at the news because it's designed to just take us into a space that doesn't let us appreciate our shared humanity. And with that, I really want to extend my thanks to Sister Queen Patrice for making it possible for me to move forward. We're sending prayers of strength and healing heart mercies to our beloved visionary queen, Sister Queen Angela. Just sending a powerful energy, put our hands up, just cover her, keep her strong, let her be victorious in her healing. There is so much she desires to give and do as she continues to give and do. For those that say amen, say amen. Those that say hallelujah, say that too. Hallelujah. Woo! Whatever we got to say so we can keep that energy up and elevated, right? And until, amen. There we go. Amen. All of that. Amen. Ra. Woo! Give that light, right? We say du'a and ter. We give thanks and praise. When I'm saying Hotep, I'm simply saying, well, I'll be more specific, Yam Hotep. I greet you in peace, and I trod forward from this gathering with peace, tranquility, and ma'at forever and ever. Until our next podcast, we look forward to you just having a joyous experience on this earth trod. And when it gets challenging, take a breath and remember that you are a house of life. We give thanks and good night.